So hello and welcome everyone joining this stream. Thank you for joining today's webinar on why should I care about Docker. I am Jonathan on behalf of the Explorer Dev community hosting this webinar sponsored by Gapstars, also in collaboration with the Colombo Docker community and DevOps Sri Lanka. So before we move on, I just wanted to check if my volume is on. Are you all able to, if y'all can type on the chat box, yes. Thanks. So moving on, I think we just wanted to do a quick audio check as well as you know, your mic's muted. We'd like to remain the same, but of course there's the chat box and we'd like to have more questions coming in from all of you all, and we're going to take as much as questions as possible as well. So also on that note, let me remind you that this webinar is all about Docker for June. We're trying to be exploring Docker this June, and also coming up is another exciting webinar that's on the 24th of June, Dockerfile best practices, which will be tackled by Kasun Rajapaksa. So we are very excited to have that, and I'll be sharing the registration link for that on the chat as well shortly. So I want to share this exclusively with all those who are joining today. So without any further ado, let me invite our speakers today, Manojit Palewata, co-founder, Avantrinto and director, Urban.lk, as well as Ruhaim Ismat, senior software architect at Gapstars. So welcome to both of you all, and maybe I'll let you all to start, do a quick early start of, so handing over to Ruhaim. So while you share your screen, also let me probably also remind everyone that we are keeping this to 1 hour, but probably we might take another 15 extra minutes to answer any questions, and we do want to answer as much as questions as possible. So do bear with us. So over to you, Ruhaim, if you could share your screen. Also, a very quick shout out to our friends from the Docker community in Colombo, and also the DevOps Sri Lanka community for being so helpful and putting this together along with us. So thank you as well. So over to you, Ruhaim.
Hello guys, thank you Jonathan for the introduction. I think you can see my screen. Just give me a message saying that okay, you could see my slides.
Yes, it's visible.
All right, great. So it's visible, right?
Yes, visible.
All right, so I'll jump in directly into the topic because we have a lot to cover today. So the question of why should I care about Docker, right? So Docker has been a buzzword for the past few years, like 2 to 3 years, right? It's been a buzzword for the past 2 to 3 years, and there are still some developers who still don't know what Docker is and what it represents, what problem it actually solves. So there is still a good number of people who don't know what actually Docker means. So this talk is mainly focused on giving that introduction, or as to why, as an individual, in the IT industry, you need to be caring about Docker and how Docker could help you go up in your career, right? So today we'll be discussing this, the overview that I'm planning to take. We'll be talking about a tale of two individuals who we will be using them to identify the problem of what Docker is trying to solve, and how we are able to progress in our journey of learning Docker. So we will be highlighting a few terms as to what a Docker file is, as to what a Docker image is, and what a container is, how to get to how each of these are related to each other. All of it will be having a very basic idea. We'll be introducing you to the concept of containers, and thereafter we also have a hands-on demo covering whatever that we discussed prior. And then we will also have the question and answer session. So if you have any questions during the time that I am explaining certain things, you can reach out to the QA button on your Zoom, and then maybe shoot out your questions, and we will take that up after our demos are over if we had time. And if we didn't have the time, yes, then we will be making sure that your questions are answered before the next session starts. So Jonathan gave you a preview of what the next session is. That's about the Docker file, right? So just before the next session starts, maybe we will cover up those answers for those questions. And after everything is over, I will finally come to the point where we will be answering the main question of our talk: why we should care about Docker, or rather, why I should care about Docker. Right? So let's get into business. So the story of two individuals, right? So imagine that there are two individuals who are just after. I'll make you think about. You go back about 10 years back in time, and this Dennis and Sammy are out from their university education, and they are walking into the industry. So both of them join a company. Maybe they join the same company. One joins as a developer, who is Dennis, and then we have Sammy joining as a server operator. Right? So 10 years ago, server operator was a thing. So there was a person who was looking after, who was in charge of managing the servers. So these two individuals, they start their career. This is their first job, and then they start working on a project, right? They start on a new app. So Dennis has the most work to do. He starts working on that, and then he comes to a point where his code is ready to go live, right? So he's done all the work on his local computer. He's done all the testing, and he realizes, right, now the app that he was working on is ready to be pitched live, or ready to be put live. So the process of getting his code onto the server is not direct, right? You don't just copy your files, your source code over to a server and then expect things to work, right? That is not the way IT is set up. So before we do that, there are certain methods that we need to carry out for us to come to the point where your code resides, or code ends up in the server where your code is getting executed, right? So we don't directly copy in files. So what we do is we have all our codes in a source code management system. So you push your code to a source code management system, and then from the source code management system, as a developer, during those times, you just push your code to the source code management system, and then that is exactly what is required from you to be done. So as soon as you put your code in the SAM, then we expect that your job is done, right? And then thereafter, the server developer, the server operator, he takes up, he uses the source, the code in the source code management system and puts it onto the server, right? So that is where our friend Sammy comes in. So that is his job. Once the code is pushed to the Git, so I'm using the word Git So maybe many people don't understand what a source code management system is. So in the modern terms, we can equate it to Git, where your code resides, everything is versioned, and then you can go back in history and figure out when your releases were made and stuff like that. I'll keep that to another talk probably, but the idea is that the developer pushes his code to Git, and he considers that his job is done, and then the server operator, he comes up, he pulls in the code from Git, puts it on the server, and it is his duty to get that source code working and running in production for anyone, for an outsider to use that application. That was the expectation some years ago, and I'm sure it is still the case in some organizations right now, right? So now imagine that Sami takes this server, the server operator, he takes up this code from the Git, he puts it on the server, and this is a typical dilemma that all of us have faced in the industry, right? You as a developer, you say that you have your source code and it works on your machine perfectly with no issues at all. But the moment someone else takes your code and puts it on the server, then the actual bugs start to appear, the actual problems start to appear, right? The true issues start to come up at that time, and then there is so many escalations going on. The management comes up and they say, okay, you've been working on the system for this long, and then now when you put it on the live server, this doesn't work, wasn't it tested? So when the developer is asked the question, he says, okay, it works on my machine, I don't know why it doesn't work on the server. Probably there is a configuration issue, there is some hardware issue that's causing this not to work. So you need to go back, and then all of your efforts developing the system, all the time that you put in developing the system now needs to be converted to figuring out where things are going wrong. And that for a developer is a frustrating thing, right? So this is a typical dilemma, the dilemma of the developer saying it works on my machine, and the server operator saying that, okay, your code doesn't work on the server, right? So why could this kind of a thing happen? That is the main question. So when you go into retrospective to figure out where things are going wrong, what is the reason for the issues to happen, all those things, I am just listing out a very general set of things that could have gone wrong. So one is that you could have an incompatible OS or an OS version. So as a developer, you might be developing on a Windows system, and when you deploy it, it might be on a it might be on a Linux system, or else you would have been working on a different flavor of Linux when you are developing on your developer machine, but when it is deployed, maybe it's in a different flavor. So likewise, there are many reasons, few of which I have listed down. This is not the complete list, but these are few of the things that I could imagine, and through my experience that we've come across, things that cause the application not to work, right? So all of us, I wouldn't deep dive into these things, but yeah, this is just for the purpose of understanding that I just wanted to highlight. So incompatible OSs, different versions of libraries. You work with Java runtime environment, one version of the runtime environment. You have another version on the server. You have a 32-bit OS, and then on the server it's a 64-bit. Likewise, so many different things could have caused this issue, right? So the question to why could it happen? There could be multiple. And then if you started to figure out, okay, right, the OSs are matching, then the version of the library dependencies are matching. Likewise, if you start to do those things, and then this list will even grow further when you have a complex system. For you to debug all these things, it is going to take you time, and it is going to add up to a lot of frustration. And all the effort that you put in initially as a developer to get the code working on your machine won't go recognized. The management wouldn't recognize whatever that you did, all the effort that you did, all the night oil that you burned is not going to be highlighted in the management view because for them they want the code to work on the production, and that promise or that expectation has not been fulfilled. So the developer is always the bad guy here, right? So that is where we need to have this piece that I call the missing piece, right? In addition to developer, Dennis here pushing his code to the Git, right? He also needs to have a document explaining how the thing needs to be deployed, right? So usually what happens, or what happened a few years back, even I've been working that way for some time, where after you push some code to your Git, to your code repository, you start working on a document. You need to write it in Markdown or some other kind of format. It needs to have specific sections saying, okay, which ports to open, which are the dependencies, what version jumps happen, you need to update the dates, all those things. You need to have a kind of a very structured document that needs to be prepared for every sprint that you complete. For every release you make, you need to prepare a deployment document. And it is this deployment document that the server operator takes up. He reads through all of them, and then he needs to manually carry out those tasks on the server for him to replicate the, for him to make the application work and replicate it in other servers. So that was the pattern that was followed in order to reduce the problems of you pushing the code to Git and saying, okay, I'm done. Now the server operator, it's your job to start deploying. So it was the developer job to prepare the deployment document also, which again you spend your time coding for some days, and then you spend a day or two trying to write documentation as to how your code needs to get deployed. So this becomes a frustration in the long run, and then you need to manage so many other things in addition to the deployment document. You need to manage versioning. You need to make sure that the old deployments don't break. Likewise, so many things need to be put into this before the deployment document is properly done. And since this is done manually by a human being, right, there are two sides that it could go wrong. So the developer could add a wrong configuration on the deployment document, and then since he had maybe he copied a wrong URL and put it into the deployment document, since he's put the wrong details on it, the deployment document, even if it was followed to the rule, followed to the line, it will not work. That is one issue that you could have. The other issue is that if even the deployment document was completed properly, perfectly by the developer, if the server operator, he doesn't follow at least maybe one step in the whole set of steps, even then the deployment could go wrong, right? So there is always this scenario where the deployment document is used as a mode of creating tension between the developer and the server operator. So this is, though this deployment document was solving some problem, it was creating newer issues, and then living with those also was not friendly for a smooth agile flow in terms of development. So what does a usual deployment document have? So this is just again a vague set of, not a vague, it's just a very general set of stuff that a deployment document could have. One is the OS infrastructure, how it needs to be deployed, then the app data, or like what source code needs to come in for the deployment, if there are any external configurations, and even if all these are in place, if the order of execution of those settings, right, say you had an SQL that needs to be run, if that SQL was run, it wasn't run in the proper order as indicated in the deployment document, then too your deployment would fail. So all these things, the infrastructure, the source code, the app configurations, the order of executions, and many other more, this is all of it needs to be there on a deployment document, and the person operating or following the instructions in deployment document is expected to follow all these in proper order, right? So this was how it was some years ago. And now, thanks to Docker, Docker comes in with a solution for all this, right? So what Docker lets you define is, it lets you define a document that is similar to the deployment document, but it is named, it is simplified in a way that you write that document just like the way you write some code. So if you write a deployment document, it is human to human communication that you need to have. So you need to be worried about the grammar, the proper use of plurals, the past tense, the future tense, all of it needs to be there in place for a human who is reading it to understand. But in the case of Docker, it simplified it so much that it is just like as a developer, you're oriented to write code in a structured way, right? So just like that, it gives you a similar syntax, actually a very much simpler syntax, where you define your infrastructure, your source code, your application configurations, and the order of executions in a very simple way that even a machine or a human can read it and understand it. And the best part is that even without a human being reading it, a machine can read through, the Docker system can read through the Docker file and do the work of the server operator and execute the order of instructions, so that you have with your source code a deployable or a deployable, repeatable set of instructions that can be used to put your code live. So what Docker is trying to do is, it is trying to simplify the setting up of the deployment document to a very abstract level, where not only a human being can read it and understand, but also a machine can pass it and carry out those operations without any human intervention. So what is this Docker file, right? So Docker file is nothing but a text file. You could see the ones that that I have highlighted here, right? These are the commands that are there. These are the keywords or the commands that you could run in Docker file, that you could have in a Docker file that instructs certain things to, that instructs Docker to do certain things. So we'll be discussing further. This is just a specimen that I want you to see. So in this, we are basically saying, okay, you select a base image, then you run certain actions on the server, copy certain files, then export certain port, and then start executing a certain command on for your application to start running. So it's a very simplified version. If you were to write this in a set of deployment steps, right, you will have to explain so many things here. But since Docker file is abstracting all that, this becomes a document which is easy for the developer to understand, easy for the server operator to understand, and more importantly, it's easy for a computer, for a server to understand, execute, and then start running. So these are some of the basic Docker commands that you could use inside a Docker file. I won't go deep into this, but I just want you to see that these are very simple words that you could have in your Docker file. And if you wrote it in the case of this, right, the order of execution, like I told you before, is important. So you start from here, and then the order that you put your commands actually translates into what needs to be into the order of operations that need to be carried out. So placing them in the proper place, the developer is able to communicate what exactly is required for the application to be deployed and running, right? So the best part is that when you have your source code, right, it is always, now you have this Docker file here, which when it is since it is just a text file, you are easily able to push it into your source code system. So if you are using Git, this usually will be in your Git repository. So it's always checked into your code, and every time you make a deployment, make a release, or complete your sprint, the Docker file is also going to be there in that sprint. It is being carried along with your sprint. It is being carried along with your release. So it's just accompanying it, and then it becomes a no-brainer at one point where once you have your Docker file set up in the right way, you just need to run one command on your machine, which is like Docker build, and what it will do is it will combine this application, your source code, and the Docker file, create an image that has a snapshot of your application, right? And then when you jump into this, now our expectation is to get a Docker container running. I will be coming into what a Docker container is in the next slide, but what we want to do is, our end goal is to get our source code to be inside a Docker container. But Docker doesn't let you get there in a direct line, but you need to go through a Docker image, and then a Docker image only finally becomes a container. So you need to run two commands, one to build a Docker image using the Docker build command, which combines your application code and the Docker file, and it creates an image. And once an image is created, you call the Docker run on that image, which lets you have a executing Docker container. And the executing Docker container is where your live server is going to be. Like displayed here on your screen, right? The arrow pointing to Docker, you can see I marked as 1. For you to have Docker running on your server, you need to have this software called Docker installed on your machine, which usually is Docker supports both Windows and Linux, but on a live server, on a live environment, usually Docker is installed on a Linux or Ubuntu platform. And then on top of Docker, the best part is that though you only have one server, you could have multiple containers that is running different applications. So you can see that we have app 1, we have app 2, app 3. So 3 different applications, which means 3 different containers running on top of a Docker instance. And all of it is actually running on one server. And that's the best part that Docker actually lets you achieve. So I'm not going to go deep into this. If there are any questions, I can answer it. But what my expectation was for you to understand that your source code that is here, now as a developer, you are concerned about this here. So in addition to that, by learning Docker, you will be having the Docker file as well. So once you have this combination ready on your side, it's a matter of running a few commands, the Docker build and the Docker run command. And as soon as you run that, you have your application running on a Docker instance. And then this application is able to, it's like you put your code live, that's it. Once you have your container deployed on a Docker on a server that's running Docker, then you have your application basically running. So there is no need for a server operator to come in between and try to intervene and then try to execute these commands. So our end goal was to get our code to become a container. So to do that, we were I wouldn't go deep into VMs. So anyone who has an idea about VM, I just put that here for you to compare the differences between the Docker setup and the VM. So if you don't know about VMs, it is better that you not worry yourself, not concern yourself on this. But if you are if you have experience using VMs and you think, okay, Docker seems to be providing the same solutions as what VMs are doing, then I can take that up in the question and answers. So I will assume that you don't know anything about EVMs, and then I'll skip this slide. If you do have any questions, you can put it up as a question. Yes, so this slide I'm trying to explain to you what a difference between a Docker image and a Docker container is. So you know that Docker container is where our live is running, where our live code is running. Docker image is an intermediary step which is required from Docker that you need to get to before you are able to create a container of it, right? So main things that I might like to highlight here is that an image is immutable, which is that if you need to create a newer version, or if once you created an image, there is no way that you could go into that image and start making changes to it. So that is the expectation from Docker, is that you don't make a change inside an image once it's done, once it's built. But if you need to create a newer version, what Docker expects you to do is to create a newer image, a new image, and discard the old image. So you don't go in and modify an existing image. What you do, you discard the existing image, create a brand new image with the newer, with the newer Docker file, and then create a newer image. You never go in and alter an existing image. So that is what immutable means. But in terms of a container, even if the container was to stop, even if the container was to shut down, you are able to restart it, and then some of the state will still persist. You can go in and make some changes on your files in that container, though it's not advised. But there is some persistence in the container level, but on an image level, it is immutable. And then an important thing again, number 6, right? An image does not use any CPU or memory. It is in a executing dormant state. So just having an image on your computer will not create or use any CPU or memory. But only when it is converted to a container, only when you use the Docker run command and make it a container, then it becomes an instance that utilizes CPU and memory. And the other thing, an important thing, I have a slide also explaining this. Maybe I will take it up in the next slide. And number 2, you could see that the image is prepared on your development machine. So preparing the image is usually done on your local machine, on the developer's machine. And then a container is run on a server machine. So where your code is, where the Docker commands are run, is based on whether you are going to build an image or whether you are going to run a Docker image, whether you are building a Docker file or whether you are running a Docker image. So this is the journey of how a Docker file gets transformed to a Docker image, and then a Docker image gets transformed to a container. And on the next slide, I'm making it a bit more relevant, or a bit more closer to real life as to how it works. So this is your local machine, your build server rather, where your source code and the Docker file is there. And on the local build server, you run this command, the Docker build command, and then a local cached Docker image is created for you. But then these Docker images are supposed to be shareable. So for it to be shareable, we need it to be pushed to a central repository. And then that central repository is what a Docker hub or a Docker registry is. So it's like a Git repository, like you have a Git repository for your source code on the internet. You also have a Git. You also have an image repository, a Docker image repository in a Docker hub. So like GitHub, you have a Docker hub where you can push the images that you create into the Docker hub or a registry that you have created on your own servers. So for simplification, for the purpose of simplifying, I'll say you just push your code to your Docker hub, and it will be residing along with all the other images that are there. And maybe in a deployment server where you want to deploy this image, you make a call, you make a Docker pull command and pull that Docker image from the Docker Hub and then call the Docker run for it to go or for it to become a Docker container. So that is basically how you get from a Docker file to a Docker container in a real life situation. That is where the Docker Hub comes into play. So the expectation is once you get to the point where the Docker container is deployed, then you have your code live. It's there for others to run. That is, so as a developer, your focus is somehow to get your Docker file and your source code to go through this journey of becoming an image, residing on the hub, coming back as a image to a deployment server, and then be deployed as a container on that specific server. So this is a very, very high level example that I am giving you, an overview that I am giving you. So we will be diving in to the codes. So I'm inviting Manojit to take over from here, and then we'll be joining afterwards for the Q&A. Manojit?
Thank you, Rahim. Yes. Okay, hi guys. So I think so yeah, I think we'll just get our hands dirty a bit. We can just go on sort of a hands-on session. So what I would do is I would be switching off and back with the slides and VS Code, so that we could see what I'm going to be explaining, as well as we can sort of a live coding session. You can see how things are in real life as well. So before we start off, a small thing about setting up Docker. So this is a very basic thing. You just go to Docker, get Docker link, and you can install it yourself. But one small thing you have to be care about is that Docker needs the root permission to normally run the Docker D2. If you want to connect to the Docker daemon, it requires a root permission. So this is not, this is not a good practice. What they recommend is that you create a new group called Docker and add the user accounts that will be running Docker into this particular group. So if you are on a Linux-based system, you can use maybe something like usermod or useadd command to create a new group and basically add your running user. Maybe let's say you deploy using a user account called sysadmin. So you will be adding the sysadmin user account to the Docker group, and then sysadmin can use Docker without problem, without using sudo. So just keep that in mind, guys, because when you install Docker, you might, it's a long document for the installation, and you might miss out a few steps. But it's quite important that you do it when you're installing. All right. So after that, for the first thing, of course, I think everyone that is hello Docker. Whatever the hello world example will be the first thing we'll be doing. Let's dive into the code. So I think it will be the easiest way to explain. Let me just clear a few things. So you guys can clearly see the the source code and the terminal, I assume. If there's any problem,
it's better if you can show your system, like a GitHub.
Oh, right.
Yeah. Maybe you can put it up on
the chat. Yes.
It's on the other tab. Yeah.
Okay. I just send the Git link, guys, so that you guys can take a look at all the codes yourself as well while I'm going through this. So that will be easier for you guys to see. So what we will first do is try to create a small Python app that essentially just prints hello Docker, and try to put it into a Docker image and see how we can run it. So that's basically what we're going to do here. The first thing is, let's try running whatever the app we are going to deploy before doing anything. So it's called hello.py, and see it simply prints out hello Docker. So that's our that's the thing, that's the app we are trying to deploy today. So if we think about this app now, let's assume this is your a huge project that you are about to deploy, and now it's a Python app. Now you need Python to run this particular thing. So far that's all right. That's cool. That's the only dependency you need. Let's see how we are going to code this particular dependency into our Docker file. So essentially in this Docker file, what we are saying is that, hey, look here, we need Python to run this particular file. And after you install Python, we probably need to run this hello.py using Python. That's all. So in Docker file, we exactly say that, first we use this command. From is will probably be in 90% of your cases the first line of your Docker file. This defines what your base image is. So now this is an interesting point because this idea of base image can be a bit vague when you start it out first. So if I am to say a base image, sorry, base image is like a pre-installed, a pre-installed computer. For an example, let's say, let's say you get when you install Ubuntu, you get different flavors. Like you have Ubuntu, you have Xubuntu, you have very basic Debian versions as well. So the difference is that different distros have different apps pre-installed. So if we got Ubuntu itself, 1,000 different new software installed, versus if we get Mint Linux, it only barely has anything installed. So this is exactly what we are doing here using the base image, right? So what we can do is after we type from, we can define from where we need to start. What is our base computer we need to run this thing. Here what I thought is, okay, I'm going to start with the Python installed in computer because that's what I need. That's Python is what I need. But keep in mind that you can start with almost anything. You can start with a blank, just a blank image as well, but it's not recommended. But you can absolutely start with the Ubuntu image and then install Python yourself and then do the same process. So it's just simple as that. But for the convenience and to make sure that certain things are in line, for an example, installing Python would be quite easy. But if you are installing something, something very tricky that has different C++ compilations and everything, of all this, always check whether the particular vendor or particular Python or Node or whoever the vendor has a standard image, has a standard image in the Docker Hub, in the the open source Docker Hub community. So if you have an official version from the vendor you're trying to install, always use that, unless you have some very specific reason to not to do so. Okay, so we select this Python 3.7 Alpine image. Let me explain what does this mean briefly. Python, first we define the repository. So we are getting it from the Python repository. We could have different Python installations. Then we define their version, that's 3.7. And after the hyphen, it says Alpine. So Alpine, if you are not familiar, is a version of Linux. That's a very minified, very small build of Linux, which is, I think, roughly around 50 or 60 MB. So if you don't like Alpine, you can actually use Ubuntu here, 3.7 Ubuntu, or maybe Debian or something else. But you have to make sure that this particular build is available in the Python repository. If it's available, you can definitely use that. So we'll go with Alpine because one of the rule of thumb is if you can make the image size small, just go for it, make it smaller because images tend to build up, bulk up once you start installing things. Okay, so we've been on that point for some time. So yeah, we select the base image. Now we have to copy whatever the contents into our image. So at this point, see, image is not, as Luhaim said, it's not a live thing. It's a dormant thing. It's just a specification. But at this point, just think that if your image has now started, what you will have is sort of a computer with Python 3.7 Alpine installed. So if you have a computer there, what's the next step you would do? Next step you would do is to copy your source code into this particular computer. So that's what we are doing here with the copy command. Copy the first item should be from where you should copy. That is the relative path of the host machine, or maybe the absolute path as well. So what we are saying is, okay, copy the contents of the current directory to the /app directory. So this would do is in our new machine, it would create a directory called app and then copy contents in our current directory. So in our current directory, the contents is I'll just zoom in a bit so you can see. Oops. Okay, I think you can see that in our current directory, app1 directory, the contents is just a Docker file and the hello.py. So we are essentially copying these two files there. And then the third one is the word dir. So this is like saying cd/app. that is, just get into this app. Our image should always, our computer using our image should always start up in the, /app directory. I mean, it doesn't have to be app. You can, start in /root or /home or whatever directory you want. But since we are copying our source code here, I think it would best we start in /app directory. And then finally, we specify the CMD, what particular line we should run when our computer starts, right? That's the final piece of the puzzle. So we have got a new computer, we have put the OS, we have copied our source files. At the very end, we have to mention how do we run the particular app. So that's what this is doing. CMD Python hello.py means, okay, when this image is starting a container, run this file, just run this command. That's Python hello.py. All right. So this is basically what it is. It's quite very simple. There's no rocket science. There's no, huge algorithms going on. Just a set of instructions and different meanings. Let's see how we can first build this. What we can do is you can simply say docker build, and I again say what the Docker context is. That is, I say docker build everything in this current directory. So what Docker do at this point is that it would search for a Docker file in the current directory, and if it's found, if it would open this particular file here and run line by line. So the thing is, if you're running this on your computer, you will see that you will be stuck in this line a bit. I mean, it's not necessarily stuck. There will be some progress bars and everything going, because these images need to be fetched from the Docker Hub. So those need to be downloaded. There will be some progress going on. That's all good. And then you can see that it has copied contents of the app and have switched to the directory. And then, you can forget this for now because we'll be catching that up soon. And then they say, okay, just running this particular command. So how do we know whether we have, actually built it? We can run this command, docker image ls. It simply, lists down all the Docker images we have in our system. So Ruhaim has a lot of images. I mean, we had a lot more, but we tried to clean this up for you guys. Now, all these were things that were there previously, so you can, sort of forget that. This new item without a name or a tag, this is what we have created. You can see it's created 51 seconds ago. It has a size of 72.5 MB. Why it has a size of 72.5 MB is not because our code is huge, it just has a print command, because our base image is 72.5 MB. So we have actually taken a sort of image of Alpine here and have it installed with Python, and we are installing our app on top of it. That's why we have this sort of a size. So if you selected Ubuntu, you'd see like 300, 400 MB here. So that's why we have to be careful when you are selecting our images. So that's there, but you see now, you can see that all the images have nice names, but ours just say none and none, which is it's very ugly. So let's try to sort of rename it. How we can rename this? We can okay. And now we do imageless again. See, now we have a hello Docker. So, I mean, we have a hello Docker. We have created a new repo called hello Docker, and it has automatically added the tag called latest. That's because if we don't specify a tag, it would just assume that we are, we are building the latest version of whatever we are building. That's why. So yeah, now we have this, and actually there's a shortcut for doing both of these together. That would be docker build -t. And then we can mention, the tag while we are building itself, because it's just easier. And then the build context. So if you do this, it would build again, but this time you can see that there's a hello world. Okay, there's a hello. So that's another thing you should be aware of, that if you are giving different tags, Docker will essentially treat them as different repositories, so different images. That's another thing. Okay, so this has been really simple. I think, you're probably thinking we could have just copied the Python file and run it. This is kind of pointless to do. Yeah, so we'll just move on to something that's more down our, more realistic. I don't get your hopes up with just a Flask. So I think many of you have worked with Python or not. So having running a REST API is one of the things we have to do in a, or I'd say a day-to-day, life sort of a thing. So what I have here is, very simple Flask app. We have one root to the, the root of the API. It brings hello world, and I'm going to run it on the root, the local host. So let's say, something I would recommend for the first few, Docker specifications is that if you're not sure how to get your Docker file straight at the first run, don't just try to write the Docker file at the first run. Just try to create the steps you would follow if you're doing this on another machine. Just like Uhaim said, like the document, the deployment document. Just try to imagine what you will be doing if you are doing this without Docker, so that these are the steps I will be following, and then you can convert it to your Docker file initially. With time you're gonna get really used to this, and you won't need that trick. So with that, let's try it. I am just gonna try running app.py and see what I'm getting. Okay. So I tried running Python app.py, and I get this error: no module named Flask is found. So it's quite apparent that we haven't installed the dependencies of the software. So what I should do is, I do a pip install here, and it would download things, and then Flask app would run as expected. Since there's not a lot of time, I would skip that part. But the point is that now we know if we are converting these exact steps into a Docker file, we have to realize that we have to install our requirements at some moment and at some point. So because of that, when we are right in this Docker file, you will see some few additions from the previous one. If you go through it, we have selected the same base image, the Alpine image, and we have copied our things, and we have changed the word dir. So far, so good. Everything's similar. And now we have something new. We have run, and we have a run command. This is exactly what I said earlier about knowing your steps. We know we have our apps here. In the early example, we didn't have these two lines. We just jumped straight away and ran our file. But now we know that we have to install our dependencies before we run. So that's what the run command does. What the run command does is that it would run, it would execute a command at the image building stage. Okay, you guys probably would have this question: what's the difference between run and the CMD? Run, executes in the image building stage. It would do something and trigger something and change the image content, while the CMD is mostly to execute at the start of your container. It's more for instruction to say, hey, when you're starting the computer, run this thing. That's all. The run command does not say that. It doesn't say that every time you start the container to run the pip install in your computer. It says run pip install in your computer once, and then once you have done it, it's all good. Don't run it again. So that's the difference between these two commands. And then there's another one called exports. I think it's very obvious what I'm doing here. Flask, Flask APIs by default run on port 5000. So if our computer, think of our computer is AWS instance, and if we created an API and we just up any API in AWS, you can't really access it, right? You have to open your ports so that, due to our security and everything, you have to open ports so that people can connect to your instance. This is exactly what we are doing. We are saying that, okay, we have to open port 5000 before anything can happen. So we'll try this one now. We'll build it. We'll tag it as, let's say, Python API. Python API. Yeah. And now you can see we are a bit stuck here because it's installing our requirements. Is it installing Flask, right?
So it's line number 7 that's executing it.
Yeah, exactly. So line number 7 is what all this, this bulk text was. It has installed Flask and all its dependencies. So far, so good. So okay, we'll just see whether we actually, put that right. Do we have Python API? All right, we have Python API. And now let's try running the image. Run Python API. Okay, so it's working, right? This is, I mean, the Flash-Cap is in the debug mode. This is, not recommended for production, obviously. But so it's running. So naturally, we'll think, okay, we should be able to go to our web browser and go to localhost 5000 and see whether it's working. Okay, it's not working. So what have happened here? I mean, we have opened the port, we have done everything right, but we can literally see that it's working here, but we can't connect to this instance. So this is one of those instances that you will realize that although we say that our container where this API is running is not a virtual machine, it's still not part of your host machine. From when Ruhain, explained you the structure of the container, he showed you that there's a host OS, and then there's the Docker engine, and then on top of it the containers, right? That's the difference between exact difference here. So your 5000 port, what we have exported, this is exposed in your container. So think of it as a small VM in your computer, because the thing is we don't like to call it a VM because the functions are way different. I mean, the Docker people would go crazy nuts if you say like it's a container is like a VM, right? No, it's very different how the things are working. But it has some of those qualities. That's why one quality is that it's in a sandbox layer. So this sandbox layer prevents opening, ports in your host machine, obviously for security and best practice and a lot of reasons. So what we have to do is just like we are configuring our AWS instance, we have to say, okay, we have to sort of let's think of as a firewall. We have to say that in the local host machine, I will create a new port that would actually, forward all these requests to the port 5000 in my container port. So that's what we have to do. We have to bind our local host to specifically bind our local host to our container, so that we now know that we are in control. We are in control of what port will be opening in our local actual physical computer rather than in the the container. So how we do this is quite simple. We get the previous command, run command. We say, okay, we need a port binding -p. I don't know, 1 2 3 4, and we say in our host computer, our port should be 1 2 3 4, but it should send all the requests to port 5000, and we say. And now, in the container, it doesn't even know, right? It doesn't even know that we have anything called 1 2 3 4 defined anywhere. It's minding their own business. But if we go here, and now if we say 1 2 3 4, boom, we get the hello world appear. So you can see now we are having 1 2 3 4. We are sending request to 1 2 3 4 here, but we are exposing 5000 here. But it doesn't matter because we are in control of how the port should map from our local host to our containers. All right. Okay. So that's one thing I want to talk about. I'm just going to check my notes, which is also a set of commands, ironically, to see whether I have missed anything. Okay, yeah, I actually missed something. So while writing the Docker files, I mean, today it's not about the best practices of Docker or anything, but something that I believe you should know from day one is that how you give the way you order your instruction set matters a lot. So initially, it won't really matter initially when you're learning, it won't matter, but when it comes to a certain stage, you will see that changing a few of these lines has a drastic difference, right? To prove this point, let me do this. Now we have this particular app. Now what we will do is we will go do some minor change. Hello world 2, right? So if we now run the image, it won't show hello world 2 because obviously it's not been built, right? We have to build this new image now. We build it, and now we have to run. Since our source has changed, what's happening is they are running this entire instruction set from top to bottom. Our requirement text doesn't have. Our requirements haven't changed. The dependencies are the same, but still we have to go through installing all of these because the way we have structured this Docker file is wrong. How to do it properly? I'll just copy paste it without wasting a lot of time. The correct way would be to copy our requirements to our app folder first and install this particular set of requirements. So now this creates, but before I explain, I mean, I think the best thing is to just show this, because if I just keep explaining, you guys won't understand what's happening. So again, I mean, we are running a new Docker build. You can see that installation is going the same process. Apparently there's no difference from the previous stage. But now look at this. Now we go and do something like no dep change. That is, we are saying that our source code has changed, but our dependencies have stayed the same. So just you know, don't do the dependency installation again. Okay. So this time there was no dependency installation. What has changed? What has happened here? What has happened here is that earlier what we have done is we copied everything. I'll just go here to see. We copied. Sorry. Earlier what we have did, we copied everything and we changed the word br and then run the requirement text installation. But what we have here now is that we first copy our dependency set, we install our dependency set, and then only copy the rest of the source code. How this matters is that when you run this particular run, use this run command, there's a concept called Docker layers, where it would actually create a cache, the sort of image that is, halfway done, a half-boiled image sort of a thing it would create. So when you run this, this particular run command from here, at this point, these things will actually be cached into another image. You can see that here. You can see it's saying running.
Go further. Further. 5, 3.
Should be. I mean, you would probably find around here. That's what it basically says is that this part is now cached. We are not running it because nothing in this part has changed so far. If you do a change to requirement.text, obviously this part would run, because you see there's some change and they need to run the dependency installation. But since we are only changing this part, what Docker is saying, okay, I have cached this part. There's no need to run this part. We only need to run this part. So the process is, really fast. Now with one requirement, this takes like a few seconds. You are thinking, why do we care? But think of node modules. Always think about node modules, because it takes a shitload of time. So when you have to build it, 5 times every hour when you install a new node module, you're gonna appreciate the structuring. Speaking of node, the next example is actually node, where we will touch one more concept that is quite important. That is, we'll see. So this final demo is actually on a very simple Node Express, server. It doesn't do anything. It just shows hello world SDSS when we run it. So let's go to Dockerfile. We'll see what's happening here. You can see that we are now using the correct way of doing the dependency installation. We are copying the package.json first. We are installing the packages first. And then we are copying the rest of the things to the the container, and then we are exposing for 3000, and we are doing an npm start. So what I have done here in the package.json is I have used Node1. I think probably all of you know why we use Node1, because it's easy to have the hot preloading sort of feature. This is basically what I call is Docker for development. I don't know whether it's a real thing, but what I believe is that Docker is not only for deployment. You can use Docker for development as well. I mean, think if you are walking into a new job tomorrow, and think if you are inheriting a huge project with 1,000 different dependencies, 1,000 different services running. First 2 weeks of your job would be to get your laptop set up and have all these things set up. But rather than that, you can inherit a single Docker file, or maybe set of Docker files realistically, and just run the Docker file and start coding day one as well. So that's another thing we could do with Docker, but I'll show you how we could do this one. So let's build the image first. Let's call it Node API, and we build it here. And the much hated npm install is running. All right, and then we'll just see whether it's there. It's there. Okay, all good. Now we have to get our port bind. Let's say we'll put it into 2222. Okay, that's strange. Okay, I have misspelled Node API to NDOE API, so we'll run NDOE API and let's go to 2. Or okay. Okay. Yeah.
3,000, right?
Yeah, it was 3,000. So that's another thing, guys. Just make sure you bind the port correctly. All right, we have Hello World SDSS working, all good. Now, if we are actually using the development server, what we would need is that, so this is some file inside the source directory. What we need is, okay, I'm excited, I am adding some exciting feature. So what I want is that when I click save, I want this to reload and, to this to run, right? If I'm using Docker for development. I'm just using Docker for development thing as just an example to show the importance of what I'm going to show, but there's a lot of features apart from this. So what's happening is, even if we are changing here, obviously our Docker image is not updating because these two are not related, right? The Docker is running in their own happy Docker container world, and our source code is here in our local. So how we manage this is that what we can do is to mount, I think most of you are familiar with Linux mounting, how we mount a drive into our, a different drive into our local computers, and then we can access the drive. So same way, we can mount a directory in our local environment to something in our container environment. It's very similar to the port binding, but it works on drives, directories. So how we do this is, it's quite simple, but I'll just put it here. I'll just have to copy the command from here. This is sort of long. How we do is, we have Docker, we have run, and then this -v. -v flag says, okay, we are creating a new volume. How the volume would be created is that this particular path you can see is that a location on the real physical world. This is the location on our real physical host machine. We are binding this particular path to this particular virtual path in our container. So that's what this command is about. We have Docker run. We say, okay, there's a new volume. We are binding things in the source directory to the source directory inside our container, so that whatever the changes we do in our host machine will be now in real time updated into our Docker container as well. I did this thing. Yeah. So if we go back, okay, the port is different also. Yeah. Now the port is 9092. It's there, but look at this. If we go to our sum file and say haha, and we save, you can see that this executes in real time. Whenever I just make any change, any gibberish, you can see that it just updates instantly. So you can see one use of mounting is this, exactly this, where you can use it for development, but I don't think this is the intended use of volume itself, but this is one good example of the usage of Docker volume. But something really something useful is when you have services like MongoDB, and when you have to get your logs out, and many different, when you have to specify your config files. This is a really good way to find your host machine places to your timeout. So we'll be going through the rest of it in a bit of its fast manner. So I actually wanted to touch base on Docker Compose as well, and I think it's a bit too advanced at this moment. But in very brief, what Docker Compose does is, now see, we rarely would have just one service in our platform, right? I mean, in our today's microservice world, we would be having a user service, or then we would be having some other, some restaurant service, another few other services running. There should be brokers, message brokers running, MongoDB is running, all those things. So what Docker Compose does is, just like we have a Docker file for one service, Docker Compose basically lists out all the services that should be there for application to be run on another server. I'll just briefly show you what it looks like, but just don't, be afraid, or, just just think, oh my God, what's going on here? But it's very easy. It's for some reason they have chosen YAML to write this file. I mean, if you go to the Docker Reddit, you'll see that no one likes YAML. So if you are going into Docker, you should try and hate YAML as well. That's some community thing. So if you can see that it's very simple. There's services defined. There's MongoDB. There's Nginx, and this is our our own thing. So I'm not going to explain this, but I just want to show that Docker is not limited to just deploying one thing. So Docker has a lot of capabilities, and those things I think in our future webinars, these things will be covered. So we should check those out as well. So one final note I want to show that, I mean, whatever said and done, unless this is going to help you in your deployment, if the sysadmins over there thinks this is going to actually help in your deployment, it doesn't matter, right? And what I have outlined here is a very basic but very standard deployment pipeline we are using today in the present day because of Docker. So how we do this is, I think, visually, I mean, what the high level thing Ruhaib also explained, we have our dev computer, we have our code. So we do our changes and we push it to our the remote Git. And we now have in the remote, we have the source code in the dev. And whoever, maybe the TA team lead or the the project manager or the architect says, okay, now this code looks good, I will push it into the staging branch. Okay, my code is now in the staging branch. In the staging branch, now with the exciting CI/CD pipelines we have, what we do is, probably Jenkins is monitoring our staging branch and say, all right, there's a new staging push. I'll get the staging push. I'm going to build this staging push, and then I'm going to create a Docker image. So in Jenkins, a Docker image is actually created, and then this Docker image is sent to a Docker registry. I know we didn't speak much about Docker registry. Think of it as a place where all your images live. Where do images go if they go to the Docker image registry? Think of it as that. So in our CI/CD pipeline, our staging image goes to Docker registry, and now our QA department, the people we love very much, they get notified. All right, get this staging image. It's ready. You guys have to test it out. They get the image, and for them as well, running it is quite simple. I mean, sometimes they won't actually get the image and run by themselves. This would directly go to a staging server, but this is one of the scenarios. So they run the image and say, all right, this image is cool. This is everything checks out. There's no bugs, surprisingly. So you can release this one. So from here, you can either merge the code to release and then build it again, or maybe you can just upgrade the same image to a release image from here to here itself. And then, we just, the CI/CD pipeline itself would push the image to our production server, and boom, we have a fully automated CI/CD pipeline that doesn't involve anyone doing, building or compiling, running CDs or anything. So that's the sort of a thing, that's the sort of the end game that we are looking at, in the big picture. So I think that concludes the demos as well. I think we can move on to the Q&A. Should we get it here or?
Yeah. So thank you, Manojit. That was a very nice set of demos that you demonstrated for us to get an idea of what Docker is. So we've gone 15 minutes past the time that we promised that we'll complete this. So that I can see a few questions that are there, right? About 7 or 8 questions. Do you think that we could take at least 2 or 3 out of this?
Yeah. So some of them are very specific, but I think we could. Yeah.
It is something to do with SSL, right?
Yeah. So I think this is very specific. Shall I?
Yeah.
So I think if you got the first question, I can see that.
Yes. Read it out. Then others will.
Can we put it here? Will they say it?
Oh yeah, maybe we can.
Sort of like drag it
Yeah,
here.
drag it.
Okay. So it asked, want to check whether anyone have used Docker with HTTPS by signing with public valid certificate authority. So this is very specific to your technology stack. I mean, in my opinion, in my experience, I'll be saying it depends on what you use as the web server or whatever the content server. So if as a practice, what we do is we use let's say Nginx or something, and from Nginx we install the certificate to Nginx and we export Nginx as the API gateway. So that Nginx takes care of the. You can do it with Node, you can do it Flask, you can do it by virtually any web server that has the capability. So it's a very technically specific thing. It's not quite that hard to do with Docker.
Yeah, please explain on the Docker file.
I think we did that.
An example. Yeah, I think we covered this. But if you really need to know, all the commands, what they do, what they represent, the Docker documentation is very well documented. You get a good idea explaining each and every command. So I encourage you to go that and then have a look. So from our end, I think the time constraint that we are having, we had to cover a lot of things in a little bit of time, right? So we covered to a degree where we can get you guys started. So this is not supposed to be, trying to explain everything to you, but just an eye opener as to what Docker is and how it is going to help you. So that is that. Anyway, to deploy Docker image without connecting to a Docker registry. This is offline deployment services. Yeah, that is just what we did now, right? All the demos that Manojit did today, we didn't send anything to the Docker registry. We didn't make a Docker push command anywhere. So all of it was done on a local thing. So it is possible. You can do an offline deployment as well.
In case they are maybe asking whether if this is like sort of secure deployment in somewhere like because once the image goes to production server, it would obviously call the Docker registry to get the base images, right? If you are wondering about that, what you can do is to have a private registry. You can create your own private registry in your internal intranet, and then you can push all the images to the intranet, and then get your secure server to get the images from the intranet. If that's what you are thinking about, but apart from that, we are doing everything offline.
Yeah, and in addition to that, if you don't want to go to connect to a Docker registry, you might need to then on your deployment server or on your production level server, you might need to pull the source code, the Git and the Docker file, then build it in that place, build the image there, and then run it there itself. That too is something that is possible, but I wouldn't say it's
it's a sort of takes away the whole point of Docker.
And then what about server performance if you create multiple Docker images in the same server? You want to answer that?
Yeah, I don't think it actually matters because as Rehan said, images are dormant, right? It only takes space. But if you are thinking about space, it's a very valid argument. There's been more than once that I got the messages that one of the VMs are falling down because it's run out of space. So you have to take care of the space. You can prune the images from time to time, but it doesn't affect performance per se because it's dormant. It's not live.
Yeah. And we have 3 more questions. When we want to test Docker, we have to perform Docker build multiple times. Every time it's downloading the base image. Is there any mechanism to cache the base image? So yeah, I think what he's saying is actually caching is something that Docker gives you out of the box.
Yeah.
So if you actually pulled one base image, like you're saying. So in our case, we were using the Alpine image.
Yeah.
So we pulled it once, and thereafter it never was. We never went into the servers and fetched it. Yeah. So Docker out of the box provides you that caching. From the question that you are asking, I think that is the answer that we can give. If it is more specific, I think we can give more substance to the answer. Yeah. But from the question that we can see, I think that is what we can give. Is there any way to build my Docker file from scratch? I mean, without using an Alpine base image in this case.
It's I mean, you can, right? So
Yes.
if you get the computer and if you turn it on, there's nothing inside. Then you have to install something. So you have to start with something. I mean, if you are, I mean, Alpine, I would say Alpine would be the very atomic thing you could start with it. But you don't have to go with the Python image. You can start with Alpine and build it up. But going atomic more than that, I'm not sure what the requirement is. But don't try to build a compile an OS in the Docker file. Because the Docker file sort of needs some base point to work.
Yeah, you are not trying to build an OS.
Yeah.
You are trying to build an application that runs on top of an OS.
Yeah.
So that is the solution. That's the problem that Docker is trying to solve. So in that case, I wouldn't advise you to create some base image from scratch. You always need to depend on an image. And from a Docker best practice point of view, it is best that you use an official image that is there on the Docker Hub.
That's great.
Just for the purpose of security. The Docker file expose 5000. Is it the same as defining the port in Docker run?
It's not. So you see, if you remember, expose 5000 is saying that okay, this is my computer. I want to open this is my virtual computer. I want to open port 5000 in my virtual computer. Now I have port 5000 open, but my local host still doesn't know that my container has a port 5000 open. So what the port command, the port option does in the run command is that to say open another port in my host computer that could essentially divert all traffic coming to that port into port 5000 on my container. So these does two different things. Expose says in my container open this particular command. If we didn't have expose and we only do the port mapping in the Docker run, it would still won't work because in my container now the port 5000 it doesn't know about port 5000. It hasn't created port 5000 in my container. So we need expose to open the port and then the port binding to drive the traffic from our host to the container. So it's the two different functions.
I can just add to that a bit. Maybe I can just run through quickly to the slide that I wanted to share. Right. So here the Docker file, right? Inside the Docker file is where you're having this expose, right? So but this expected of a Docker file is something that we were trying to solve with a deployment document. So in the deployment document, you would say manually saying, okay, this when it is built, when the application is built, it is supposed to run on port 5000. So it is just like on the documentation, you need to mention for the server administrator to come in and say, okay, I need to open up port 5000 for it to work.
Yeah.
So it is like sort of a documentation also that this is used for a person who doesn't know anything about the application, but is looking at it from a deployment point of view. When you look at this command here, the expose 5000, it is basically documenting that this specific application, when run, will be having something that is accessible through via this port that we are trying to open up in this point. So it again serves as a purpose of point of documentation as well. Where are the questions?
Maybe if we minimize this. I'll just give a name.
I hope this will go up. Okay, two more questions. If there are two containers in the same base image, do those containers use the same? If there are two containers with the same base image, JDK, do those containers use the same runtime?
No, it's different. So it's like when the container starts, it's like it would like copy the files to their thing. So a container takes a separate space. So it would not share. If you, let's say, in your container you do something to your JDK, it would not reflect in another container that's using the same base image.
Yeah. So again, if we go back to this point of view, right? So from this diagram, I can answer this. So in one server, you could have multiple Docker containers. I think this is what Manojit wanted to explain also previously. So if you have a container that's running, this container is not aware of any other containers that are running on the same instance. They are not able to communicate between each other except through a run command that we have through a port or through a volume mapping. Through a network overlay. Apart from that, all these containers are standalone sandboxed environment. So there is no reuse of code in this container to be here, nor can this container is able to see the stuff inside this. So they are all executing in a sandbox environment, right? Last question, is it?
I can take.
I think the questions are now increasing.
Yeah. What's the future?
Okay, what's the future of Docker?
I wanted to Cryo. I honestly don't know what Cryo is.
Okay,
Are you heard about?
I'm not sure about what Cryo is, but future of Docker, what I can tell you is that we only touched the tip of the iceberg, right? We've not gone deep into any of the things. We just wanted to make this an eye opener for you guys like the question, like the title of this talk, right?
Yeah.
Why should I care about Docker? So we are just trying to get you into why you need to be concerned about Docker, or why you need to be interested in Docker. So the future of Docker is, we have Kubernetes coming in. We have so many other platforms with the cloud, with the evolution of cloud, and then the answer for the next question, for the main question, right? But why you should care about Docker? That we have a slide for that. So I will get to that point as to why it is important to you. But the future of Docker, I can say that it is going to stay, and with Kubernetes and other technologies that are built on top of Docker, we have a long journey to go.
Yeah, the other thing is that when you learn Docker, you actually learn about containers, containerization. So it's like you are learning the concepts behind the Docker is implementation, right? So it's a brand. It's a brand behind the technology of containerization. But the important point is containerization was there from the 90s or 2007 or something. But till Docker comes, nobody thought it can be used in this way for deployment. So I think Docker is quite important. I honestly haven't heard about Cryo, but I'll definitely go and have a look what they have to offer as well. But I think now new containerization products come to simplify this process. We had Kubernetes, then they had Kuber 5.8, like Kuber 4.8 or 3.8 or something. Things come out to make the things life easier. But knowing the basics, the foundation, I think would help you whatever products you use.
Yeah. Other than exposing port web scenario, can we use Docker container to provide a service of a service client? Yeah. So this web port is just one port that is we use it for the simplification, or like for you to just to see it on the browser. Yeah. But for sure, you can open up other ports and then.
For example, the Hello World, you can print Hello World without opening any ports.
Yeah. And then, is there any way that I can take out a random name which is created from the Makefile?
Is there any way I can take out the random name which is created from Makefile? You're talking about I think you are talking about the hex ID attached to each of these images and containers. So you can take it out by tagging. You can specify the -t to give a tag to your image name, and when you are running, you can specify -name so that you can give a name to your container. So you can take out the for this thing, you can take out the hex string that you can do. But I think when you go to the actual deployment, you will find that you are using other tools on top of Docker, like maybe Docker Compose or Swarm, Kubernetes. There are many tools. So with these tools, you won't be actually worrying a lot about the IDs, to be honest.
Yeah.
But at this stage, I mean, it's good to know.
So I think that's all the questions that we have. So hopefully that's all that we can take also.
Yeah,
we have almost gone half an hour past. So we'll just come to the reason as to why we need to be worried about Docker. So this is the reason, right? I was talking to you about two individuals, our story, Dennis and Sammy, right? Now with Docker, you can see that all of it has got simplified to a situation where you actually don't need to have a server operator. So that the job of a server operator with Docker actually has made it outdated, or it has made it dormant. So because of that, what has now happened is that the companies realize that having an individual just to do the server maintenance, just to do the deployments is actually an overhead, and because of that, they have merged this concept of this developer and the server operator into one person. which is called the DevOps. So all the people who are into development, the expectation, the next jump for them, and what the companies are expecting from them is for them to also be versatile enough for them to be able to do the operations. That is to go to the level of deployment. So a developer doesn't stop developing, doesn't just push his code to Git and stop his work and say, okay, I'm done, my work is done. But now the definition of a developer is now extending with the term DevOps for him to also now be responsible for the code that, for the deployments that are taking place on each and every production, right? So the term DevOps, it has been there for a long time. It's been a buzzword for a long time. If you go into the internet and search about it, you will see that, you know, I've read about that, saying that, okay, DevOps guys are getting paid more than the developers, right?
It's a hot skill right now.
Yeah, it is a very hot skill. So the next level in your evolution as a developer, if you think, okay, you're the best coder in the world, yeah, you may be that person. But in the industry, the way things are evolving, until you become responsible to the code that runs on the server and it is working perfectly, until you can deliver that promise, you are not considered, you don't see, you are not seen as a person of value to that specific organization who is trying to get your services.
Yeah.
So that is the reason why we think DevOps, the reason of DevOps coming into place, the requirement of the developer to do the job of a server operator is why you should be caring about Docker. And that is what I think is the answer for why you should be caring about Docker. So this is aiming mostly to the developers out there, but for the server operators, or the person who's been working on the server management level, I think this is a good time for you now to start looking into other platforms that are running on top of Docker, like for example Docker Swarm, Kubernetes, and then what do you call it, the cloud infrastructure, to get into some kind of cloud platform like the Amazons or the Googles or the Alibaba or something of that sort. So it is time now to change the idea of, okay, I know Linux, I can do anything, to now just look outside to see, for you not to get outdated or pushed out from the industry. It's better that you look into these cloud areas and maybe even try to get into development. So
why not?
So for developers, starting Docker will let you start on your DevOps journey, and for the server operators, it is more than Docker. In addition to Docker, the other platforms like Kubernetes, like Docker Swarm, and other competing technologies, along with the cloud infrastructure, I think that is the way to go for you in your growth in your career.
It's not even just the the everyday APIs. I mean, now we have MLOps as well. The ML/AI.
Yes,
DevOps is expanding like crazy. I mean, it's not just your average API deployment. It's about everything, getting something from your local computer to production on everything, literally everything. It's very machine learning. It may be IoT. I think it would be really interesting if you check those IoT DevOps cases where they would push out these updates to 100,000 devices, incrementally using the same technologies that you just saw. So it's vast, it's massive.
Yeah. So like we said, like this is just the tip of the iceberg, and our expectation was not to give you a thorough walkthrough of what Docker is, but to give you an eye opener as to what it is capable of doing and what problem it is solving, and more importantly, why you should be worried about it, right? So I hope we answered you guys' questions and your expectations, and thank you. Jonathan is waiting to try to
Yes.
find this.
So thanks, Ruhim and Manojit, for taking the time. Really awesome presentation, and I'm sure it's added value a lot to many of us. Just a quick reminder to everyone, as Ruhim said, we are at the tip of the iceberg, so we're going to do a deep dive in the next session on Dockerfile best practices, and that's going to be taken over by Kasun Rajapaksa, who's also on the stream. So it's going to be interesting that we take some of the learnings from here and join us on the next one on the 24th of June. So I'm going to share the link on the chat box as well. So if you're not registered, do register before we open up for public as well. And do share it as well with your friends. So that's it from us. And thanks everyone for participating. Thanks Ruhem and Manojit for once again, being on this stream and doing a fabulous job. So thanks guys, and also big shout out to the Docker community in Colombo, as well as the DevOps Sri Lanka guys for coming up and supporting us all the way right through in putting this together. So thanks everyone, and good night.
Yes,
Thank you.
thank you
Thank you,
guys.
guys.
Goodbye.
Thank you.